Welcome everyone to the February 2026 seminar series. I think we're all in a little bit of disbelief that it's already February, but we're glad to have you here with us. Next slide. So a few housekeeping items. This seminar is being recorded, and that means that we will be able to share it tomorrow or the next day on YouTube. We usually are able to have both the English and the Spanish available. All participants are muted, but we welcome questions or comments in the chat. At the end of the seminar, after we've heard from our speaker, we'll have 10 minutes or so for Q&A. And then please remember that interpretation is available for those of you who just joined and didn't hear instructions. At the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer, is an interpretation icon. It's a globe shape. And if you click on it and select either English or Spanish, and then we have people who can assist you in the chat if necessary. Next slide. So for those of you who are new to our seminars, we are the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety based at UC Davis. And our mission is to improve the health and safety of people working in agriculture in the West. We do this through research, trainings, and outreach. And we're really excited to have a speaker here who has done some research with farm workers about the skills they want to learn. Next slide. Before we get to that, I'm really excited to share that we have a new website that we have developed. It is something that we created with and for farm workers as the primary audience. It's available in 6 languages, including 3 indigenous languages. And we encourage you to check it out using this QR code on the screen. We currently have several topics available, but we're going to be adding more: heat illness, valley fever, wildfire smoke. So check back for new topics and let us know if you have any suggestions or questions. All right, next slide. So with that, I'm really happy to introduce our speaker, Katherine Jarvis-Shean, who is a farm advisor with the UC Cooperative Extension. And she's going to talk about a project that they worked on to ask farm workers what they want to know more of, what skills they would like. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kat.
Great. All right, thank you. Let me get my slides up here. How's that look? Good?
It's great.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks so much for the introduction, Heather, and thanks for letting me join you all today on this webinar. I'm going to be talking about not health and safety, but certainly agriculture. So I appreciate the opportunity to sort of be an interloper in this space and share some work that we're doing to try to expand additional work with farm workers beyond ag health and safety, though, like, not to diminish that at all. That's very important. So it would be really helpful to me, because I haven't spent a lot of time in this seminar, any time in this seminar space, if the folks who are participating, if you could put in the chat what organization you're joining from, if you're part of UC, what part of the University of California you're from, or if you're with a nonprofit organization, that sort of thing, just the name of that would help me get oriented to sort of who's on the call. And I'm guessing people are typing because I don't see it lighting up yet. Oh, everyone. But as you all are doing that, I'll get started. So as Heather said, my talk today is going to be about what farm workers told us, this research team, they wanted to learn from University of California Cooperative Extension. So maybe the first step in that is, what is the University of California Cooperative Extension? Most people are aware of what UC is in terms of UC Davis, UC Berkeley, UC Merced, but not everyone has heard of UC Cooperative Extension. We are sort of the boots on the ground of the UC system. So we have an office in every county, and our job is to try to make sure that the information that is being generated at the University of California at all the different campuses is being used by everyday Californians and is applicable to their lives. So there's a number of ways that we do that. We work in youth development. So we have in-school programs and after-school programs with nutrition and science. We have home and garden education. So like helping folks grow food in their garden, food preservation classes. And then really, I'd say one of the main pillars of UC Cooperative Extension and what I'm involved in is agriculture. So research and education to help produce food sustainably, safely, and nutritiously. So what I'm going to talk about today is the background of this project that we had talking with farm workers about their educational desires regarding agricultural production. The focus groups we did, our process, our results, a sort of smaller survey that we did with growers, with farm producers, and owners and managers about what they would want their workers to learn more from us about. And then one of the results of all of that work, some workshops that we did around integrated pest management with farm workers at the very end of this project, and then some time for Q&A. Oh, that was too many at once. Excuse me. Okay, so we had a very big team on this project, reflecting a number of the different disciplines that were involved. So, oops, keep sliding forward. So a lot of folks like me who are advisors in the counties in the cooperative extension system were eager to work more with farm workers, but really didn't know where to start, how to get a foothold in the community, what farm workers would want to learn from us. So what you see on the right of your screen is a number of different orchard advisors and folks who are related to orchard production in the UC Cooperative Extension system. And then on the left, we're like, okay, we know trees well, soils, but we're not always great with people. So we need some social science expertise to help us with these focus groups. So we got Amanda Crump, who's at UC Davis, involved, and her grad students you see there, Sarai and Andrea. And then we need farm worker community experience. So we got Christy Getz, who's at UC Berkeley, involved. A lot of folks on this call in the ag health and safety arena might know Christy from her work at Berkeley. And then a nonprofit called Centro de la Familia, which works in Fresno County as a advocacy services and resource center for primarily farm workers, but a lot of low-income folks in Fresno County, not just farm workers. And I should say this was all funded by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. So big team to make this happen. Okay, so what were we trying to achieve here? Cooperative Extension was established more than 100 years ago to aid in the diffusing and application of the latest agricultural research. But there's for a number of reasons, institutional inertia, a history of bias, structural barriers. We have a modern agricultural extension system that's focusing resources still on farmers, which made a lot of sense 100 years ago when farmers were anyone working on the farm was in the family, but our system hasn't kept up with the evolution of agriculture to also start including farm workers in our educational resources. We've got just over 100,000 farm producers, or what we often call growers, but almost 900,000 farm workers in this state. So focusing those resources on growers and not providing a lot for farm workers, one, didn't feel equitable to a lot of us working in the system, and two, just felt like we're relying on a game of telephone to make sure that the information we're telling to growers gets down to their workers on the ground, rather than creating resources that are targeted for those folks on the ground who are doing the day-to-day work on the farm. So that's what we wanted to address, is that inequity. But we knew going in that we're talking about very different what we often say clientele, working with two very different groups here. We and Cooperative Extension, Agricultural Cooperative Extension, are accustomed to working with growers who are older than farm workers by about 20 years, generally born in the United States, have finished high school. Most of them have college education, and primarily speak English, whereas farm workers are generally younger in age, mostly born in Mexico when we're talking about California farm workers, didn't finish high school, so the language, we would need the level of language complexity would be different, and just the language itself would be different, since only about 1 in 5 farm workers report speaking English well. So what we set out to do was ask 3 questions with this project. One, what agricultural topics do farm workers want to learn about? Because as agricultural advisors, that's what we can address. That's what we have the knowledge to share about. So that's the resources that we could provide. But knowing that this is a different demographic, what are farm workers' preferred learning methods and times, assuming that might be different from our traditional demographic, and what are some barriers to learning that farm workers would have. So we set about doing focus groups with farm workers. We had 16 focus groups that were all in the Central Valley, from Woodland down to Bakersfield. 8 of these were with farmer partners, grower partners who allowed us to come onto their farm and talk to their workers for an hour. We brought some lunch and just sat down at a round table. We asked the growers to leave, but it quickly became apparent that even though there was good engagement in those focus groups, there's just some stuff people are not comfortable being open about when they're at their place of employment. And so the second half of those focus groups were co-organized with Centro de la Familia in Fresno County. No, actually, in the whole San Joaquin Valley. And that was really helped us access more information and different information than if we had just been on farm. So that was great and really key to our success. Each one of these focus groups had 2 to 3 researchers in them, and we really made an effort to make sure that those researchers came from a Spanish-speaking household, and had some farm worker family history or background to be able to relate to the folks at the table more. We started everything with a casual conversation. We brought food, either lunch or dinner, depending on the time. And then from there, we had a semi-structured hour-long conversation. We had some guiding questions, but we let conversation flow where it would for a while, and some sample materials to help people understand kind of what we were asking about. Because really the biggest hurdle as we were getting started here is this is a community that ag advisors in cooperative extension have never worked with, have not extensively worked with before. As an institution, we haven't put great effort into that. There are some advisors throughout the state who have taken initiative in this, but there's not a lot of that. So we were like, what would you want to learn from UC Cooperative Extension? And there was like, well, what is UC Cooperative Extension? So we had some sample material to make sure they could kind of know what we were talking about. These flip cards that showed different insects that you'll find in an orchard that are integrated pest management program produced, books on prune production, that sort of thing. So that's how we went about this. And then, not to get into the details too much on this, but then that audio was transcribed, and the social scientists found keywords and phrases that kept getting repeated, and we grouped those to see, okay, what are the big topics that keep coming up over and over again, and what are the learning, whether it's ag topics or learning methods or barriers. What we found was, before even getting into the topics, I'd say there was a really strong interest in these new learning materials, and more like learning possibilities for the sake of curiosity, for improved job satisfaction, and for increased earning potential, which tracks with what we see in the limited literature on this. The majority of farm workers enjoy working in agriculture, prefer that to a lot of other jobs that are available to them, and believe that through agriculture with appropriate education, that like ag careers can be a pathway to a better life. So then shifting to the topics that kept coming up, we heard a lot of interest in pest management, and I'll get a little more granular on what each of these topics means and subtopics in a second. Pest management, followed by plant production. Then folks third were interested in equipment and technology. And then after that, agrochemicals, so pesticides, fertilizers, that sort of thing. And then a lot of little topics came up. So when I say pest management, by that I mean, when we think of pests in agriculture, the technical term for pest management includes both bugs and diseases. But more than anything, we heard about invertebrates, bugs, people wanting to learn more about those. Followed by understanding plant diseases and a little bit about vertebrates like ground squirrels and gophers, and then a smattering of other things that were hard to categorize. This is not entirely surprising. This is also a learning priority for growers, dairy producers, sustainable ag educators when you look into the scientific and sociological literature. And I think it also makes a lot of sense because insect and disease damage is really visual, is really dramatic. And so it's understandable that that would be a top priority, that people would be like, this thing is happening. I know it's happening, but I don't know why, and I want to know why. So for example, we heard from farm workers, why does the pest like the plant? Why does it like nesting there or damaging it? Or regarding diseases, it makes me sad when I look at the little trees drying up. Right now, there's a field where many trees are dying, and I would like to know why. So that was pest management, what we heard about. The next topic that came up a lot was plant production. So by plant production, that can mean plant nutrition, like fertilizer, varieties, cultivars, soil health. It can encompass a lot of things. And these are also common concerns for growers. Farm workers told us we heard a lot of just general interest in plant production. I want to understand why the plant grows well, how it grows well. A lot of interest in orchards, which in California is not surprising. Also, all of the growers that we worked with for those focus groups had orchards. A lot of them also had other crops, but so no big surprise there. Grafting, which is a special skill to put one variety on top of a different one, and is a higher paid skill. So that's not surprising, but I was surprised that that was 1 out of the 5 responses we got, pretty much. Planting, how to plant things well so they grow healthily, row crops like tomatoes and other vegetables, and then a lot of other. But I think it's interesting that about a quarter of the time that plant production came up, it was a very general language around that, which we interpret to mean that farm workers would benefit more from like a breadth over depth kind of educational material on plant production. So some things that farm workers said to us in the plant production category was, I want to know all that's checked that is good so that the production is good. And with regards to orchards and vegetables, how to harvest more fruit or vegetables too. I haven't worked much with vegetables. I'd like to learn more about that, what the seasons are, and when to plant them. And finally, the last big topic that came up that I'll be talking about in depth here was equipment and technology. So a big one that we heard about was large machinery. You know, sometimes they were specific about the shaker, the tractor, etc. And then just general maquinaria, like machines. And then some on repairs, a little bit on computers, but not a lot. And then a smattering of other small topics. This also makes sense. You know, equipment operators are higher paid than most hand laborers. In the Central Valley in California, if you get to choose between an air-conditioned vehicle cab and being outside when it's 110 degrees, I know which one I would choose, even if they paid the same amount. And, you know, farm workers are aware of the mechanization happening in agriculture and often feel that, you know, there's more job security if you're on it, if you have this mechanized training, if you're working with equipment. So we heard from farm workers, for example, I'm curious about machines that are being used now. How are they working on them? How do you get that job? Or excuse me, how to do that job? And I would like to learn to drive a tractor because maybe there's longer work hours. As a worker like this was a field worker. As a worker like this, you can only work 8 hours, and we'd like to work more hours. So presumably, because of overtime laws, their employer wasn't having them work more than 8 hours doing hand labor. So that's what we learned about topics. Pest management, number 1. Plant production, number 2, with a lot of interest in just general plant production principles. And equipment, especially large equipment, number 3. So then we also tried to understand from farm workers through these focus groups what their preferred learning methods were. Far and away, the biggest area, like preferred method, was in-person learning. I should say we did these focus groups in 2023 and 2024. So we might not, if we were even able to pull off these focus groups in a time like right now, with the current political climate and fears about safety. I don't know that people would say the exact same thing. But that's what they said then when they felt safe, you know, leaving their houses and taking their children to school. You learn things by doing them, just seeing them is not the same. And we heard a lot of similar, like, I want to be able to learn it and then apply it with the expert there to ask them questions. Videos were number 2. So we heard that this is a preferred method because you can watch it at your own pace in your own free time. For example, one farm worker said, videos of this subject, sometimes we as women are busy, we're occupied in the house doing chores or cooking while listening to the information. So being able to fit these videos into their life was really appealing rather than carving out time to go to an in-person seminar. And then finally, we did hear from some folks that they liked books. They liked learning through reading. One farm worker saying, I like to read. I think it stays more in my head. All right, that's preferred learning methods. And this tracks with what other folks have heard from farm workers, like in trying to figure out preferred learning methods for health and safety, education, hands-on and video or both. As I said, preferred learning methods might not be appropriate at the moment, given community concerns about safety and deportation, but hopefully we'll get to a climate again in a few years when that's not as much of a concern, and in-person learning can be a normal part of our educational outreach again. Yeah, I'll say that this is in-person learning brought up an interesting challenge for UC Cooperative Extension. We've got, you know, folks like me, agricultural advisors. There are just under 140 of us in the whole state. And given the number of farm workers in the state, that would mean one advisor reaching out to more than 5,000 farm workers. So we're going to have to shift our thinking a little bit and adapt slightly different models, maybe train the trainer models or that sort of thing, which we're not accustomed to doing with our current majority clientele, but we'll figure it out. Okay, and then preferred times, I don't think there's a big surprise here. People prefer to do their education after work or during weekends. And in the winter season, because that's when things are quieter in the field, so they're probably not going to be working or working as many hours. And then barriers to access, I would say this might not surprise a lot of people on this call, but as someone who is accustomed to working with the very well-resourced growers, these just weren't things that I would have thought about. Childcare and family responsibilities were the #1 barrier that we heard about. We really made an effort to have a fair balance of women in these focus groups, and we heard, especially from the women, but not exclusively. We also heard this from some men that, getting a babysitter, one woman said, for example, we have to pay babysitting, and sometimes that doesn't work out. We end up paying more than we earn. Financial barriers and time barriers. We live off of what we earn, and if we want to enter a school, if we invest time and sometimes invest money, and that prevents us from advancing in what we're doing. So really wanting to be sure that if they're dedicating resources to this, that that's going to pay off. And transportation barriers, this is also not something I would have thought of given our traditional clientele. If talks are going to be given far away, one farm worker said, and if one can't get there, or if one can't find someone to take them, that would be an obstacle. This tracks with what other researchers have found who work in education with farm workers around ag health and safety, that it's hard for farm workers to find childcare, also really hard to qualify for childcare subsidies. But this is not something that I'm certainly accustomed to offering to our largely male clientele of growers who are in their 50s and 60s. So that will require some renewed and creative thinking on our end to be able to engage with farm workers better. Financial time as a barrier, financial and time resources as barriers also came up in other folks' research trying to work with farm workers, which makes a lot of sense given that the average farm worker, if they're grower employed, which is kind of on the higher end of income, makes about half of the poverty line for a family of 4. But we're used to, throwing short courses that can cost well above $1,000 for a couple of days of learning. So again, that will require us to re-examine our model and get a little more creative in how we're funding our own work. And there's a lot of policy barriers for farm worker mobility. So farm workers might not have a vehicle, or even if they do, have insurance or a driver's license, and might just not want to risk non-essential driving. So we heard this was all of these barriers really brought up how wonderful it was to work with Centro La Familia and the importance of working, people who are new to a community, working with organizations that are well established in that community. Because even for the focus groups, our Centro brought up childcare, and so we provided subsidy for childcare for the people that they invited to these focus groups. And then I'll get into these workshops we did in a minute. But they had crayons and little coloring books in case anybody who was coming to the workshop brought a kid. Their workers went out and went to like the regional areas and regional offices in Western Fresno County, picked people up, brought them back to the main Fresno office for this workshop. So they were already really dialed into this, and probably a lot of people on the call are dialed into these barriers, but it was new for us. And really good that we asked about this and not just topics. Okay, so that is the farm worker focus groups. Let me look at our time here. I think we're on track. So at the same time, we did a smaller grower survey to try to hear from farmers, what they would want their employees to be learning. We did this in the winter of 2024, talking with orchard growers in the Sacramento Valley. Smaller sample, not quite as rigorously designed, but still, I think, really helpful and informative. And so what you see, this list on your right is the top 5 areas or topics of interest that we heard farmers would want their workers learning about. Pesticide safety and application, tractor skills, planting, training, and pruning, and irrigation management, harvesting and handling, pests and diseases, and finally, equipment repair and fabrication. So those were what farmers were interested in their employees learning more about. But what was really great to hear was that more than almost 3/4 of the employers would be willing to pay their employees to attend trainings on those topics. And for you can see on the right there on the top, length of time for 2 to even 4 hours of education modules. Farmers also wanted us doing this in the winter when things are quiet in the field, and preferably in the morning for them if folks are going to be on the clock. So I think that was really great for us to hear that there is a big overlap in learning priorities between farm workers and growers. So you see this Venn diagram, right? The overlap in the center, that both farm workers and growers want to learn about what farm worker survey called plant production, what grower survey called planting, training, and pruning, what farm worker survey called equipment and technology, what growers called tractor skills, and then what farm worker survey called ag chemical use, and what growers called pesticide safety and application. So knowing this overlap is actually a great way to ameliorate a lot of those barriers, right? If farm workers are getting this education training on the clock, then that's alleviates some concerns about time, about money, about childcare, because you probably already got childcare for while you're going to be at work, about transportation, you probably already got transportation to get to work. So I think that's a great place for us to start. That's some low-hanging fruit for us to pursue. So to wrap up our focus group conclusions, the big broad takeaway is just that farm workers are interested in getting more extension resources and new extension resources from cooperative extension. The priority topics of pest management, plant production, equipment, and technology are all well in the areas of expertise of UC Cooperative Extension. So there's a big opportunity for us there. And I think we would be good ones to address this need, this desire. These preferred learning methods, learning barriers are going to require more resources, new resources, adaptation on our behalf, and partnership with folks who already, so we can team up on a lot of things. And partnering with organizations that work with farm workers was really crucial to the success, even just of the focus groups, but will continue to be crucial to working with new and diverse communities. So this is just the beginning. Really, the big bulk of this project was these focus groups, and I'm actually out on sabbatical right now, but when I come back over the summer, our whole team is really eager to start pursuing new funding, new opportunities to start creating some of these extension resources. And certainly, we talked to 140 farm workers. It's a drop in the bucket a tiny percentage of the overall population. So we'll have to keep learning as we go and keep getting feedback on what we're developing. So real quick, I want to hit on before we get to the question and answer, just a quick showing of this integrated pest management workshops that we did. That was also one of the outcomes of this grant. What we did was working with some folks on the team who were really experts in insects, and generally insects and diseases. We put together this 2-hour workshop in person on pests in orchards. So you see here, these are some of the experts showing off their expertise. Jalindra Rigel is a integrated pest management advisor in the northern part of the San Joaquin Valley. And then Houston Wilson, who you see on the bottom, is a statewide specialist in insects in orchards and vineyards. So these are their expertise. I won't belabor this too much. And then German works in Houston's lab and was really specifically hired for doing more outreach in Spanish. He joined in the last 8 of these focus groups that we did with Centro, which you can see him here, along with, let's say, on the bottom here. In the center, one of the grad student researchers, Andrea, and on the right, staff researcher on my team, Adela, who were all really critical to the success of this endeavor. So what we did was looked at 3 pests in orchards that are really common: navel orangeworm, spotted winged Drosophila, and leaf-footed plant bug. Those names are not going to be on the quiz after the webinar, so don't worry about it too much, but only to say we picked those 3 because they are key pests of major orchard crops, and high likelihood that people would be engaging with them in their work. And they were a way to illustrate, because they're different insects, a way to illustrate different principles of integrated pest management. So here's the way we approach these workshops. We had slides, but we also had handouts and a lot of hands-on activities. You see some of the slides here on the right. So the principles of integrated pest management, a lot of photos of, this is a navel orangeworm going from an egg to a worm to a pupa to an adult moth. And then we brought in a lot of live and dead samples of bugs to really have some fun getting hands-on things. And here's a few photos of us getting all up with the bugs. You see Arman on the left going through some of these slides. He's demonstrating that big yellow thing is an insect trap. You see a bunch of them on the bottom picture hanging up next to him. And then on the right, there's jars full of live bugs, live navel orangeworms, boxes of dead bugs, so people could really see what we're talking about. Because in the orchard, you try to get them and they fly away from you. So it's helpful to have people who've captured them and grown them. Key aspects and lessons that we learned from these, that it was really key to our success to make these accessible on the weekends during the winter, having food and drink so people felt welcome, childcare, getting things going with an icebreaker. There was a lot of, I think, tension around hierarchy, and so like, and just, you know, we were kind of strangers to this community, breaking down those barriers, whether that was just having little side conversations with people as they came in. How's your day going? You know, what town did you come from? Boy, the weather right now, you know. And then German was really good at asking questions that help people relate bugs to their life. He had this story about being down in Mexico, and his uncle wanted him to eat this insect, and he was like, I don't eat cockroaches, uncle. And he said, no, this is a cricket and it's, covered in lime and spice. And he was like, okay, which people identified with. And then a lot of audio and a little video, a lot of hands-on activities. Here, for example, one of the fun things that we did was crack out these what are called mummies in almond production. So these are almond nuts that stayed on the tree after everybody tried to harvest them. And these worms can then grow in there over winter and come out in the spring and create a lot of problems. So that was, people getting their hands on like a live juicy worm was a really fun activity, and figuring out who could find the navel orange worm first was some fun competition. So really that hands-on aspect really was key to engagement. Oh, there's a bunch of references from what the research that I've talked about. But that's it. So yeah, again, I wanted to thank everybody on the line for coming to listen today, and to the Western Center for letting me butt in on your what's usually a health and safety area, but it's great to have some space to overlap on our interests in farm workers and serving the farm worker community. There's my email address if anybody is interested in reaching out to me to learn more about this project. I think we're sending around something tomorrow, like a follow-up. So there's a little 2-page handout in English and Spanish on the project that I'll have, I think Elizabeth it is, include with that email. But yeah, this was a huge team, and Centro especially, took a big risk on an unknown working with us, and they were really key to our success. So we got really lucky and have a lot of gratitude there. I'm really interested to hear in this Q&A, like from folks in the farm worker community, how much of this surprised you, how much resonated with you, and just any other questions or concerns you might have that came up through the talk. So I'll stop talking.
Thank you so much, Kat. It's such a great project. I think it's so important to ask the people who do the work what they're interested in and what their priorities are, and then to align that with needs of the industry. I also really appreciate how, bringing together different partners can make a project successful. And so I think that this project is a great example of that. We did receive a handful of questions, some of which you addressed in your talk, but I think it's worth reiterating them. Um, so one question had to do with whether or not you saw gender differences in responses. Were there differences between men and women in the skills they were interested in learning? And what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we didn't, okay, so like my super nerd answer is that we didn't statistically analyze things separately for gender. We just made a point to make sure that we had a fairly balanced representation of gender in our groups. But I was in half of these focus groups. I would say childcare and family commitments came up more as a barrier for, we heard that more from women than men. I heard maybe a little less interest in equipment and technology from women, though, like, certainly it wasn't exclusively men who were interested in that. But other than that, not a lot of big differences that stand out in my memory, at least.
Great, thank you. What about differences by commodity group or, different kinds of commodities? Did you see people in wine grapes more interested in one thing versus, workers in orchards, or were you able to track that with your participants?
So I don't have a great answer for that because, well, let me say, like most of the folks that we were talking to, almost all of the folks that we were talking to worked in multiple cropping systems. So I think the level of employees that we were talking to, it's pretty rare to be and also that given that we're in the Central Valley, not all in Napa, where it's almost all wine grapes, for example, we, people were moving from almond orchards into fixing irrigation tape and tomatoes the next week. People were moving from thinning citrus to, or excuse me, thinning peaches to picking raisin grapes to doing lots of other things. So given the nature of who we talked to, there wasn't focus on like one crop in particular.
That's interesting and helpful. It sounds like you really were able to reach the heart of the farm worker, sort of workforce, which is so important. There's many more people doing the kind of work you're describing than specialized skills.
Yeah.
Um, so we hear a lot about mechanization. We hear a lot about, the introduction of robotics into ag, as well as policy changes and increases in like the H2A workforce. Were any of those sort of robotics, mechanization, and the associated job displacement potential things that workers brought up, or not?
Yeah, I think that's what was driving a lot of the interest in getting more education around machinery. I think we heard more explicitly interest in equipment and machinery learning for increased pay. But if they gave a motivation, but I think it's reasonable to assume that there was also some underlying anxiety around the changing nature of agriculture behind that.
Yeah. A question about the preferred learning methods, which I think is such an essential question to ask. And so I plan to look again at your slides and digest that information. Did you have a sort of relative percentage of farm workers who preferred one type of method over another?
Uh, no, so we the way the data was analyzed, it didn't quite work out the same way as the way we had percentages of different agricultural topics. But the ranking of sorry, we were on preferred learning methods, not barriers, right? Okay.
You're good.
Yeah, the ranking was like far and away in person. And then a big chunk of the second was like video and sort of remote engagement. And then a pretty small, but in third place percentage, well, not percentage, but how much they came up was kind of book learning.
Yeah.
So I would say the first two are really the priority for material creation and resource creation.
That's great. And I just want to acknowledge that one of the participants said that, in order for to have more women participation, they create sort of on-site childcare opportunities for while training activities are happening,
Mhm.
which is certainly challenging and really also quite important. We do that. We try to do that when we do focus groups, is like, have food, have activities, really make it so that people can realistically participate. That's really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's been, I think that's really one of the key places that working with nonprofits that are already involved in the community who have like creative ways that they've addressed this, who have contacts with childcare that people would be comfortable with, is important for folks on our end. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you capture or notice any differences between responses from people who were direct hire versus those who were hired by farm labor contractors?
Um, we didn't capture that. We tried to stay away from a sort of more like highly structured survey approach to get people comfortable in talking. But yeah, not having an exact number of that is definitely a downside of our approach. So out of those 8 sort of grower hosted focus groups, actually 2 of them were through farm labor contractors. And And then just in chatting with people at the ones that Centro set up, it seemed like a fair number of them were through farm labor, working through farm labor contractors, but I don't have a percentage or know, how responses broke down differently. Yeah, but I think all of these questions are getting to a great overarching point of like, this was a great first effort for us, but 140 people is nowhere near the whole farm worker community. So it'll really require like continued learning as we're delivering this material to hear more from people of what they want to learn. Like for example, irrigation didn't come up as a big topic, but that doesn't mean there's not people who are only specializing as irrigators who
Right.
don't want to learn about irrigation. It's just the group that we were talking with. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'll mention and actually propose it to our internal team that we do one of these seminars on a project that we're wrapping up this month about sort of similar things, skills that growers and employers want their employees to have. And so it's almost like we did the opposite project from what you all did. And so we asked mainly with a safety perspective, but really like what technical skills do you wish people had? What equipment skills? And so it might be a nice opportunity to invite you to come back and as a participant and listen to that and our findings. Um, and then to see where there's crossover. I love that Venn diagram where you're showing, here's what growers, employers want, here's what the workers want, and here's the overlap, because
yeah,
that's a really powerful space.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great like first space to start working in and learn a lot of lessons.
Yeah. One additional question that came up, and I think you alluded to it in your talk. How much did immigration enforcement or those topics come up in your discussions, or did this all take place prior to it being a more pressing concern?
Yeah, everything we did was done prior to the second Trump administration.
Yeah.
So it didn't really come up.
Sure. For
Yeah.
those of you attending who are interested, I actually have a project with the state of California to do training specifically on immigration enforcement in agriculture with a focus really on employers and supervisors, but really we have trained workers, community leaders. So if there is any interest in that, please let me know. We would be happy to do a training for you. We know that it is a serious issue in the community and really want to be responsive. Okay, last chance for anyone to put in a new question or comment. Just to give a high level who I'm seeing. I see Lupe Sandoval posed a lot of great questions. He is an expert in the industry and does a lot of great trainings. And so I think that as folks, have new trainings created, he will be a potential partner. We also have folks from Cooperative Extension, some from state agencies. So I just really appreciate everyone being interested in this topic. It's really, really valuable information. Our next seminar, I don't see any last minute questions. So I really want to thank you, Kat, for being here. We will share the resources that you mentioned out via email. And as you create trainings, we would love to be a partner in disseminating the resources or the training opportunities.
Great.
And then lastly, just flagging for everyone that um, it looks like we have a small typo, but in March, we're already going to be talking about March 2026. Dr. Tim Beatty, he's one of the investigators for our center, and he's going to be talking about ag labor and looking at some climate related data. So heat and wildfire smoke and the implication of those on workplace injuries as well as productivity. So we hope you'll register as soon as we get that posted, and join us next month. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, folks. And yes, thank you so much, Reina and Diana, for your interpretation. We couldn't do this without you.
Sorry, Heather, I
Yes,
forgot to put
please.
in a quick plug. If
Yes.
you are a UC person, we're starting a new program team, that's trying to get campus folks and cooperative extension folks together around labor and workforce development. And farm workers are going to be a big area of emphasis on that. So if you know Allie Hill or Christy Getz, Carly, ooh,
Highland.
thank you, are big players in that. So if you're interested in being part of that team, you can email me and I can get you connected.
Wonderful. That sounds fabulous. I love the idea of not duplicating work and not asking farm workers or employers, growers the same questions, all of us, but instead us coming together
Exactly.
collectively to see how we can help support the community and the industry.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, everybody, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.